At 13, I lost my mother. One quiet morning, I stumbled upon her last letter, written just from me. She had written, "You are stronger than you know. Never let fear hold you back." Those words lingered in my mind, giving me a tiny spark of hope. Little did I know, the world that awaited me after her death would be far harsher than any schoolyard challenge. My Aunt Sophie became my legal guardian. At first glance, she seemed kind, loving, and responsible. But the reality was far different. From the very beginning, I noticed subtle ways I was being deprived. New school clothes denied, dental care postponed, extracurricular activities ignored. I couldn't understand why. 2 months later, I met Marcus, an experienced attorney. He reviewed my case and said, "We need to uncover the truth. Your aunt wasn't just failing as a guardian, she was mismanaging funds legally meant for your care." Marcus initiated a formal discovery process. Bank statements, tax records, Social Security statements, life insurance payouts, and even inheritance documents all came under scrutiny. The reality that emerged was shocking. Sophie had received Social Security survivor benefits totaling $1,235 per month, a life insurance payout of $65,000, and an inheritance of $15,000, all intended for my care. In total, nearly $190,000 that should have been used for my upbringing or saved in trust. Marcus's face was grim as he explained, "And now she's suing you for even more." I stared at the figures in disbelief. How could this even happen? Marcus organized the documents meticulously. "She failed not only to care for you adequately with funds that were specifically designated for you, but she also potentially committed fraud," he said. I realized then that this wasn't about money. It was about accountability and justice. As the trial approached, I struggled to focus on both preparing my case and starting my new job at Children's Memorial Hospital. David, my steadfast partner, accompanied me to meetings, helped research similar cases, and provided emotional support. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. Memories of my mother flooded back. Her gentle hands, checking my temperature when I was sick, her proud smile at school events, her whispered encouragements when challenges felt insurmountable. Alone in the dark, I whispered to her memory, "I'm trying to be strong, Mom. I hope you'd be proud of who I've become despite everything." The next morning, I dressed carefully, a conservative navy dress, low heels, and my mother's small pearl earrings, the only jewelry I wore. David drove me to the courthouse where Marcus greeted us with a confident smile. "Ready?" he asked. Taking a deep breath, I nodded. Ready. The county courthouse was imposing, with brick walls, marble columns, and high ceilings that amplified each footstep. David and Jasmine flanked me as we went through security, their presence a silent strength. Sophie, Uncle Jack, and Cassidy sat across the corridor with their attorney, a sharply dressed man constantly checking his gold watch. Sophie had dressed in a cream suit, radiating a false aura of respectability. When our eyes met briefly, she gave a small, confident smile that sent chills down my spine. Marcus leaned closer and whispered, "Today, let the evidence speak. Don't focus on her." At 9:30, the bailiff called the case, Marshall versus Marshall. Judge Harriet Woodson, an African-American woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, presided. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined, with only a few scattered spectators. She looked at both parties and began reviewing the filings. Sophie's attorney, Mr. Daniels, approached first, painting a picture of Sophie as a selfless guardian who had sacrificed for her grieving niece. Your Honor, my client provided food, shelter, clothing, education, and emotional stability after a tragedy, all at personal expense. He gestured towards Sophie, who maintained a patient, saintly expression. When Marcus rose to speak, he was calm and measured. Your Honor, this case is not about compensation. It's about accountability for funds legally designated for Alethea's care, Social Security survivor benefits, life insurance proceeds, and inheritance, totaling nearly $190,000 that should have been used exclusively for Alethea's upbringing or saved in trust. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Sophie's composure cracked as she whispered urgently to her attorney. The truth was unfolding, and it wasn't in her favor. Sophie took the stand first, radiating the composure of someone who believed the truth was on her side. She spoke of rescuing me from potential foster care after my mother's death, detailing sacrifices her family supposedly made for me. We provided food, shelter, clothing, and emotional support, she testified, her voice carefully controlled. We did this without complaint, despite the financial burden. Her attorney, Mr. Daniels, presented an itemized account of expenses. Braces I'd never received, tutoring I'd never had, sports equipment I'd never used, all highlighted as proof of her generosity. The courtroom seemed to absorb every word, my heart sinking with each fabricated detail. When Marcus approached for cross-examination, he was methodical, almost surgical. He began by establishing Sophie's legal obligations as my guardian, emphasizing that she was responsible for managing any assets or benefits intended for my welfare. Then, one by one, he introduced exhibits, bank statements showing deposits from Social Security, documents detailing my mother's life insurance, and inheritance records. Mrs. Marshall, Marcus asked, holding up a statement, can you explain why you claim financial hardship when records show you received over $3,000 monthly, all designated for Althea's care? Sophie shifted uncomfortably. That's not accurate. The Social Security was much less, she replied. Marcus calmly presented another document. This statement from the Social Security Administration confirms monthly payments of $1,235 were made to you as Althea's guardian. Additionally, you received a lump sum life insurance payments of $65,000 and inheritance funds of $15,000. Where did these funds go? Her composure faltered. There were many expenses. Household costs increased. We moved to a larger home. It was all necessary, she stammered. Marcus pressed on, showing her the total, $190,000 in funds that should have been used for my care. Yet you provided me with secondhand clothes, delayed orthodontic care, made me work to pay for basic needs, and now claim I owe you an additional $50,000? Can you explain this discrepancy? Objections flew from Sophie's attorney, but Judge Woodson allowed most questions. Sophie's confident facade began to crumble, her answers growing evasive. When it was my turn, I spoke with a calm, factual tone, avoiding emotion. I detailed the unequal treatment I endured compared to other household members, the lack of support for school and health care, and the discovery of benefit statements in Uncle Jack's office. Mr. Daniels attempted to portray me as ungrateful. Wasn't it generous of the Marshalls to take you in? Don't you owe them something for providing a home for 5 years? Judge Woodson interrupted firmly. Counsel, the question of whether a minor owes a legal guardian for basic necessities is inappropriate. Guardians voluntarily accept responsibility along with the benefits provided. After testimony concluded, the judge recessed briefly to review the financial documentation. When court resumed, she looked directly at Sophie. Mrs. Marshall, as Althea's legal guardian, you had a fiduciary duty to use all funds designated for her care. The evidence today suggests you did neither. Sophie attempted to interject, but Judge Woodson silenced her with a raised hand. You received approximately $190,000 meant for Althea. These funds were co-mingled with personal accounts and primarily used for your family's expenses, not for Althea. And now you've sued your niece for additional money, claiming expenses that should have been covered by benefits already received. The courtroom murmured. David's hand squeezed mine, tight and reassuring. Jasmine wiped tears from her eyes. Judge Woodson's voice rang clear and authoritative. I am dismissing Mrs. Marshall's claim with prejudice. Furthermore, this case is referred to the district attorney for potential misuse of Social Security benefits and breach of fiduciary duty. Sophie froze. Uncle Jack stared at the floor. Cassidy frantically texted. The reality of her actions had finally caught up to her. Marcus smiled. Congratulations. That couldn't have gone better. I asked, still processing everything, what happens now? That's up to you, Marcus replied. You can pursue recovery of the misappropriated funds, which would mean another legal battle, or you can close this chapter and move forward. David wrapped his arm around my shoulders. Whatever you decide, you're not alone. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I saw Mrs. Jackson, my high school biology teacher and mentor, waiting with a warm smile. Her presence reminded me that true family isn't always defined by blood. It's defined by those who care for you, who validate your worth. After the courtroom battle, the days that followed were a strange mix of relief, sadness, and newfound freedom. The weight of Sophie's manipulations lifted, but memories of lost opportunities and stolen childhood lingered like shadows. David drove me home in thoughtful silence, his hands occasionally squeezing mine to offer quiet support. Jasmine and the Parkers organized a small, intimate gathering at my apartment, not a celebration of victory, but a safe space to acknowledge the journey and the pain that had come before. I slipped onto the balcony for a moment alone, letting the cool autumn air brush against my skin. The city's golden sunset mirrored the strange feeling inside me. A chapter ending, another beginning. My phone buzzed with the message from Sophie. This isn't over. Family doesn't treat family this way. I stared at it for a long moment, recognizing the bitter irony. Family, in her world, was a transaction, a ledger of cost and benefit. I deleted her message without guilt. For the first time, I felt unbound by her manipulation. The next morning marked my first official shift at Children's Memorial Hospital. Wearing scrubs and my mother's pearl earrings, I stepped into the pediatric intensive care unit with a mixture of nerves and purpose. Each patient reminded me why I had fought so hard, not for revenge, but for a chance to care, to serve, to be part of a family in a way that Sophie had never allowed. Nurse Karen, my supervisor, noticed my natural empathy. She observed, you have a way with these children. Most nurses take years to connect like this. I didn't tell her about my own losses. Those wounds were still tender. Instead, I channeled my experiences into compassion for the children and families, recognizing the courage in small victories and the fear behind every worried glance. 2 weeks after the trial, Uncle Jack called. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and guilt. Altha, I know I have no right, but I had no idea about the extent of Sophie's actions, the life insurance, the inheritance. I failed to protect you. I was calm, steadier than I expected. You watched it happen for 5 years and did nothing. Your passivity made you complicit. He sighed deeply. I know, Sophie and I are separating. The trial was a wake-up call about who she really is and who I've allowed myself to become by standing by. I felt no satisfaction at their collapse, only a complicated sadness for a family that could have been, but never was. That conversation marked my last direct contact with Sophie's household. Months passed. I learned through mutual contacts that the district attorney did not pursue criminal charges, but required Sophie to complete financial management courses and community service. Cassidy occasionally sent hostile messages online, which I managed by blocking her accounts. Life slowly settled into routines. Hospital shifts were challenging, but deeply fulfilling. Evenings with David, planning weekend brunches with Jasmine and friends from nursing school became moments of peace. My small apartment transformed from a sterile space into a home filled with plants, photographs, and tokens of a life I was reclaiming. One September afternoon, I received an unexpected email from the hospital's Human Resources Department. A trust fund had been established in my mother's name to provide scholarships for nursing students from single-parent households. The anonymous donor requested I serve on the selection committee. Opening the attached documents, I realized the fund totaled exactly $50,000, the amount Sophie had demanded for me. A separate note confirmed the donation came from Uncle Jack. I called Mrs. Jackson to share the news. She said this is his way of making amends, not erasing the past, but creating something positive. Should I accept? I asked. She smiled thoughtfully. It isn't about them. It's about honoring your mother and helping students like you. Don't let Sophie take this opportunity too. The following day, I accepted the position. This was the first step in transforming pain into purpose. As my nursing career progressed, I found myself drawn to children in difficult home situations. Their resilience mirrored my own journey. The hospital social worker invited me to join a support program for children in foster care or kinship guardianship. David supported my involvement, often accompanying me to events, even as his medical residency demanded long hours. 6 months after the trial, on my mother's birthday, I finally visited her grave alone. The cemetery was serene, leaves turning gold above her modest headstone. I placed fresh flowers and spoke aloud. My nursing career, the truth about Sophie, the scholarship fund, it all felt like a way of telling her I survived and I'm thriving. Later, I visited Mrs. Thomas, our former neighbor. Tea in chipped cups, photographs on the walls, memories of my childhood. The visit stitched together pieces of a past Sophie had tried to distort. Seeing my mother's photograph on her shelf, Mrs. Thomas smiled. She always said you had her compassion, but twice her determination. Therapy helped too. Dr. Lynn guided me to understand that Sophie's failures were not my fault. The nightmares, anxiety, and reflexive guilt slowly began to fade. Acceptance became my mantra. Some who should love us are incapable, and that limitation does not diminish our worth. 1 year later, I received a package. My mother's nursing pin and photographs thought lost. A small brass talisman, a tangible connection to her enduring love, became my constant companion during difficult shifts. Life continued, unpredictable but full of hope. David and I married in a small ceremony, saving for a home where we could build the supportive environment we both lacked. My nursing career flourished. The scholarship fund in my mother's name helped 3 students pursue their dreams, each a reminder of resilience and determination. Looking back, from the terrified 13-year-old clinging to my mother's letter to the woman I am today, one truth stands clear. Family isn't blood or legal documents. It's love, respect, and mutual support. Sophie never understood that, but I found it abundantly in those who chose to walk beside me. The courtroom victory validated my worth, but the real triumph was learning to trust, to love, and to create the family I deserved. Sophie took my childhood, but she could never take my future or my capacity for joy. If you're struggling with family who treats you as a burden rather than a blessing, remember, your worth isn't defined by their limitations. Sometimes we must create our own family based on respect, care, and connection. Even as I settled into my life and career, shadows from the past occasionally surfaced, unbidden and sharp. Certain smells, like the faint scent of old books in Sophie's house, or the distant chime of an ice cream truck, triggered memories I had tried so hard to bury. Each recollection was a reminder that the 5 years I spent under her care had left invisible scars. Yet, instead of paralyzing me, these reminders became fuel for reflection and action. At the hospital, every child who arrived without family or support tugged at something deep inside me. I saw myself in their eyes, fearful, uncertain, craving safety. I began volunteering extra hours in the Pediatric foster care program, helping children navigate medical procedures while offering the kind of emotional support I had longed for. David, ever supportive, often stayed late with me, offering gentle encouragement and grounding my emotions when cases became overwhelming. One evening, while reviewing patient files, I noticed a young girl named Mia. She had recently been placed in foster care after losing her parents in a tragic accident. Her file was thin, no extended family listed, few belongings, and a quiet, withdrawn demeanor. I approached her slowly, kneeling to her level. "Hi, Mia. I'm Arthur. I'll be taking care of you today. Want to tell me what's your favorite color?" She hesitated, but a small smile broke through her reserved expression. "Blue," she whispered. That simple answer triggered a flood of memories. My own childhood, sitting quietly in Sophie's living room, feeling unseen. I smiled gently. "Blue is my favorite too," I said. It was a small, almost imperceptible bridge between past and present, but it marked the beginning of trust. At home, I began journaling, capturing both the memories of loss and the triumphs of my new life. Writing became a sanctuary, a private space where I could process grief, anger, and hope simultaneously. I documented every courtroom detail, every conversation with David and Marcus, every subtle realization that freedom from Sophie's shadow was not just legal, it was emotional. Yet the past wasn't content to remain distant. One late afternoon, a letter arrived from in the law office I didn't recognize. My heart skipped. Could it be Sophie attempting another claim? I tore it open cautiously. It was from an anonymous source, someone who had known my mother personally. The letter revealed additional family heirlooms and documents my mother had left behind, long hidden or forgotten. Among them was a diary she had kept during my early childhood, full of dreams, fears, and wishes for my future. Reading her words, I felt an intimate connection spanning years in loss. My mother had imagined a life for me filled with joy, education, and independence. She had envisioned me not just surviving, but thriving. Each page strengthened my resolve. I would not merely live in the shadow of those who wronged me, I would honor her legacy. In the following weeks, I began organizing her documents, sorting letters, photographs, and small mementos. I discovered a scholarship she had quietly started for children in need, long before any trust fund or legal restitution. It had gone largely unnoticed, but her intent was clear. She had always wanted to empower children like me. At work, my growing involvement with foster children and scholarship programs began to attract attention. The hospital administration recognized the positive impact of my personal experience translated into professional empathy. I was invited to speak at a small conference about childhood trauma and resilience in healthcare settings. The opportunity terrified me, yet I accepted. Standing in front of a room full of nurses, social workers, and educators, I shared my journey, not for pity, but to illustrate the power of survival, courage, and intentional support for vulnerable children. That night, as I returned home, David greeted me with his characteristic quiet pride. "You were amazing today," he said. "You're helping people in ways most of us can't even imagine." I leaned against him, exhausted but fulfilled. I admitted, "It feels like I'm finally turning the pain into something meaningful." As autumn deepened, I realized something profound. My past, once a source of shame and resentment, had transformed into purpose. The shadows of Sophie's neglect still existed, but they were no longer chains. They were guides, reminding me of how far I had come and how many lives I could touch through compassion, knowledge, and action. And while Sophie remained a figure of betrayal and lost opportunity, she no longer had power over my narrative. Each child I comforted, each student I mentored, each small act of kindness became a reclamation of life, a declaration that the years stolen from me could not define the person I had become. This chapter of reflection marked a turning point. The legal victory was behind me, but the personal journey was only beginning. Healing, purpose, and resilience were slowly intertwining to create a life that was truly mine. The weeks following the trial passed in a mix of routine and reflection. My days were spent at Children's Memorial, where the hum of machines, the quiet whimpers of anxious children, and the endless vigilance of my colleagues reminded me why I had fought so hard to get here. Each shift reaffirmed my commitment, not just to medicine, but to making a real difference in the lives of children who, like me, had faced hardship early in life. David and I found solace in the small rhythms of daily life. Weekends were spent quietly, coffee on the balcony, shared breakfasts, walks through the city park. We didn't need extravagance. What we needed was stability, trust, and the knowledge that we were building a foundation together. I sometimes thought back to Sophie's household, the rigid rules and the silent, constant calculation of worth. Comparing that life to what I was creating with David, I realized I had chosen freedom over fear, connection over obligation. One crisp October morning, a young patient named Ethan arrived in the Pediatric ICU after a severe asthma attack. His mother, visibly exhausted and on the verge of tears, admitted she was a single parent, struggling to manage work, illness, and her child's care. Sitting by his bedside, holding his small hand, I felt a familiar surge of empathy. This was not just nursing, it was understanding the unspoken needs, the silent suffering that families like mine endured for years. I began to notice that my ability to connect went beyond medicine. Children, sensing my experience with loss and resilience, opened up in ways they rarely did with others. Parents confided, sharing stories of hardship, fear, and hope. And I listened, not just as a nurse, but as someone who had walked through darkness and emerged determined to help others find their own light. At home, the apartment slowly transformed from a functional space into a home filled with warmth. We hung framed photos of family and friends, planted small indoor gardens, and began the tradition of cooking together each weekend. David, though busy with his residency, always made time for these small rituals, recognizing that healing was found in ordinary moments. Then came an unexpected invitation. The hospital's social services department asked me to lead a small pilot program designed to support foster children undergoing medical care. They had noticed my ability to communicate, empathize, and teach children coping strategies during stressful treatments. At first, I hesitated. Leading a program meant more responsibility, longer hours, and potential scrutiny. But the thought of helping children navigate the very challenges I had endured pushed me forward. The program launched in early November. I recruited volunteers, coordinated with social workers, and designed activities that combined education, emotional support, and creative expression. One afternoon, as we wrapped up a storytelling session, a young girl whispered, "Thank you. I feel safe here." The simplicity of that statement hit me harder than any courtroom victory ever could. This was the real impact, the tangible, lasting difference in someone else's life. David and I also began planning a small wedding. It wasn't grand or flashy. It was about committing to a life together, grounded in trust, love, and mutual respect. We invited only those who had been part of our journey, friends, mentors, and colleagues who had supported us through trials and triumphs. For the first time, I felt the true meaning of family, not defined by legal documents or blood, but connection, support, and care. Even Sophie and her household were distant memories now. I no longer checked for messages or updates. I had reclaimed my narrative. The bitter irony of her lawsuit, which had once caused sleepless nights and uncertainty, had faded into irrelevance. The focus was now on the life I could build, the family I could create, and the children I could empower. One evening, while David and I watched the sun set from our balcony, I reflected on the journey. From a frightened 13-year-old navigating the cold corridors of Sophie's home to a young professional shaping her own destiny, every step had been hard, painful, and transformative. But through it all, I realized something crucial. Family isn't inherited, it's chosen. It's built through trust, shared values, and mutual care. Life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't dared to imagine for years. Work at Children's Memorial became more than just a job. It was a calling. Each day brought challenges, heartaches, and victories, both small and monumental. But amidst the routine of hospital life, one particular event shook me in a way I hadn't anticipated. An email from Human Resources that changed everything. The subject line read simply, "Invitation to serve on scholarship committee." My heart raced as I opened it. A trust fund had been established in my mother's name, dedicated to supporting nursing students from single-parent households. The email explained that the fund had been financed with exactly $50,000, the very amount Sophie had tried to claim from me in her lawsuit. The irony wasn't lost on me. Attached to the message was a detailed invitation to join the selection committee. I paused, staring at the screen, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to reject anything connected to that family, to close the door completely. But another, quieter voice reminded me, this wasn't about Sophie or Uncle Jack. This was about my mother's legacy and giving back to children who might have walked a path similar to mine. That evening, I called Mrs. Jackson, my high school biology teacher and lifelong mentor. Her voice carried calm wisdom. "Althea, think about what this means. It's not about them. It's about helping students who need guidance, just like you did. Don't let past betrayals steal this opportunity." Her words resonated. She was right. This was my chance to transform pain into purpose. The following week, I accepted the scholarship committee position. It wasn't just a role. It was a commitment to create opportunities where none had existed before. I pored over applications, reading stories of determination, resilience, and dreams deferred by circumstance. Every essay reminded me of my younger self, the frightened girl clutching her mother's letter, unsure of where her life would lead. I met with the first group of scholarship recipients in early December. Each student carried a story of struggle: parents lost, families fractured, financial hardships that seemed insurmountable. Sitting across from them, I felt a profound connection. I wasn't just reviewing applications, I was offering hope, encouragement, and most importantly, validation. I understood how devastating it could be to feel invisible, unworthy, or burdened. David watched from the side during our first meeting, his proud smile a quiet reassurance. "You're making a difference," he whispered, squeezing my hand. And in that moment, I realized the scope of my journey. I had survived the manipulations and betrayals of my past, and now I had the power to change the trajectory of someone else's future. In the weeks that followed, the scholarship program expanded. Word spread quickly throughout the nursing school community, attracting students who had faced significant adversity but demonstrated exceptional resilience. We organized workshops, mentorship sessions, and networking opportunities, giving them tools beyond financial support. It was about cultivating confidence, building networks, and reinforcing the belief that their past did not define their future. Meanwhile, at work, my reputation as a compassionate and insightful nurse grew. Colleagues noticed my ability to connect with children and families from difficult backgrounds. Supervisors approached me about leading training sessions on trauma-informed care. I hesitated initially, questioning whether my personal experiences could be a professional strength rather than a vulnerability. But each time I shared my story, others listened, and it became clear my past was not a limitation, it was a powerful resource. By the end of the year, the scholarship had already supported 3 students in pursuing nursing degrees. Each one reminded me of myself, determined, carrying invisible burdens, yet striving to create a future of service and compassion. And as I reflected on the journey from the courtroom to this point, I realized a profound truth. Life's most meaningful victories often come not from money or recognition, but from the ability to help others rise above their circumstances. One cold December evening, I returned home from the hospital, exhausted but fulfilled. David greeted me with a warm smile and a cup of cocoa. We sat together, wrapped in a quiet contentment, watching the city lights flicker below. For the first time, I felt complete. Not because the past had been erased, but because I had chosen to create a life of purpose, love, and compassion. And in that moment, I finally understood survival was never the end goal. Thriving, lifting others as you rise, was the true measure of success. Spring arrived quietly in the city, bringing with it a sense of renewal. The soft green of budding trees and the faint scent of jasmine reminded me that life moves forward, whether we are ready or not. For me, this spring was about more than seasonal change. It was about continuing the process of healing that had begun in the courtroom months earlier. My therapy sessions with Dr. Lin had evolved from dealing with acute trauma to exploring deeper patterns of trust, attachment, and self-worth. "Althea," she said one afternoon, "you've done incredible work in setting boundaries with Sophie's family and building a life independent of their toxicity. But healing isn't linear. There are moments of joy and progress, and moments when old wounds resurface unexpectedly." I nodded, understanding. Even simple triggers, a phrase someone used, a memory unexpectedly recalled, could bring a sudden pang of the past. I had learned to breathe through those moments, to remind myself that I was no longer the powerless girl from years ago. Yet, Dr. Lin's guidance reminded me that healing also required building positive connections, relationships that reinforce safety, trust, and love. One Saturday morning, I received a call from Mrs. Thomas, our former neighbor. The elderly woman had always been a quiet presence in my childhood, observing and caring in her understated way. She invited me to her home for tea, promising a small gathering of friends who had also known my mother. I hesitated, unsure if revisiting the past would open old wounds, but curiosity and the need for connection outweighed my apprehension. Her living room was warm and filled with memories, framed photographs, delicate lace doilies, and shelves lined with books. As I entered, Mrs. Thomas greeted me with a hug that carried decades of familiarity. She said, "You've grown into a remarkable woman," softly, eyes glistening. "Your mother would be proud." Over tea, I met people who had known my mother in different seasons of her life. Neighbors, friends, colleagues, each shared a story, a memory, a small anecdote that painted a richer, fuller picture of the woman whose love had shaped me. One by one, the connections stitched together a tapestry of my past that was no longer dominated by Sophie's distortions or manipulations. Mrs. Thomas handed me an envelope. Inside were letters my mother had written during my early teen years, notes of encouragement, reflections on life, and advice she had meant for me to carry forward. There were also photographs of birthdays, school events, and quiet moments of tenderness. I held the letters close, tears welling, feeling as though my mother's presence had returned briefly to guide me. Returning home, I realized that the process of healing was inseparable from these connections. While therapy helped me understand my past and boundaries, building a chosen family and reconnecting with those who truly cared reinforced my sense of belonging. I had survived Sophie's betrayal, legal battles, and years of emotional neglect, but connection was what transformed survival into thriving. At work, this transformation became visible. I found myself more patient, empathetic, and present with patients and families. I shared carefully curated pieces of my story when appropriate, not for sympathy, but to encourage, to reassure, to teach resilience. Children and parents responded to the authenticity, opening up in ways I hadn't seen before. My colleagues noticed too, and some sought advice on handling emotionally complex cases. David and I grew stronger as partners. His unwavering support allowed me to explore my own needs and boundaries while maintaining balance in our relationship. We began planning small weekend trips, simple pleasures, and quiet routines that felt like a celebration of life finally lived on my own terms. The scholarship committee work continued to evolve. Students began sharing successes beyond academics, personal growth, overcoming adversity, building community. Every email, phone call, or note from a recipient reinforced that the program was more than financial aid. It was a lifeline. And in guiding them, I recognized a profound truth. Giving to others was also giving to myself. By midsummer, I realized something unexpected. I no longer felt defined by the past. The courtroom, the misused inheritance, Sophie's betrayal, they existed as lessons, but they no longer dictated my self-worth. I was defined instead by resilience, compassion, and the relationships I had chosen and nurtured. And yet, healing remained an ongoing journey. Some days were harder than others. Memories triggered by a song, a smell, or a fleeting interaction. But with each day, I faced those moments with increasing strength, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. One evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, I reflected on the journey. From fear and betrayal to hope and empowerment, the road had been long and winding, but in the quiet, I realized something beautiful. The past could no longer control me. I had reclaimed my story, built connections that mattered, and learned that family was not defined by blood or legal obligation, but by love, respect, and shared support. And for the first time in years, I felt an unshakable sense of peace, knowing that I was not only surviving, but truly living. The late summer air carried a subtle warmth, but I felt something stronger within me, a steady, growing confidence that had been missing for years. Every step I took toward independence seemed intentional, a reclamation of the life I'd been denied. I realized that healing wasn't just about coping with the past, it was about actively constructing the future I wanted. David and I started to explore options for a home of our own. Apartment hunting felt different this time. No compromises for someone else's comfort, no hidden anxieties about approval or hidden agendas. Each space we visited seemed to whisper possibilities rather than constraints. We finally chose a modest townhouse with sunlight spilling into every room, enough space for a small garden, and room to invite friends and loved ones to create the warmth I had missed growing up. At the hospital, my role expanded. I became more involved in pediatric care initiatives, mentoring newer nurses, and sharing insights about working with children who came from challenging family situations. My experiences, once painful, became a source of wisdom. Colleagues began to rely on me for guidance in emotionally complex cases. I realized that the very challenges that had once weighed me down were now equipping me to help others navigate similar struggles. The scholarship committee became another avenue for purpose. Reading applications from students who faced obstacles similar to mine was both heart-wrenching and inspiring. Each essay reminded me of my mother's resilience and love, and I felt a responsibility to honor that by helping these young nurses find their path. I discovered that guiding others not only created opportunities for them, but also deepened my own sense of fulfillment and connection. Evenings at the townhouse became sacred spaces. David and I cooked together, shared quiet conversations, and planned small weekend adventures. We laughed without fear, argued without resentment, and built routines that felt nourishing rather than obligatory. The support from friends like Jasmine and the Parkers continued to remind me that love could be chosen, nurtured, and sustained, independent of biological ties. One Sunday, I decided to revisit the hospital's foster care program events. Seeing children light up at small gestures, sharing a story, helping with homework, celebrating achievements was a reminder that even the smallest actions could ripple through lives. I began volunteering more frequently, organizing workshops that combined medical care education with emotional support, hoping to give these children tools they could carry into adulthood. At home, I finally unpacked the last box from my past, carefully organizing photographs, letters, and keepsakes that had survived the chaos of Sophie's household. Each item told a story of survival, of love remembered, and of the life I was determined to build. That night, I placed my mother's nursing pin on the mantel, a symbol of everything lost and yet reclaimed, a tangible reminder that my mother's values lived on through my choices and actions. Despite the stability, challenges still arose. Unpredictable shifts at the hospital, stressful encounters with difficult patients, and lingering anxieties about family dynamics tested me. Yet every challenge reinforced the skills I had cultivated: resilience, patience, empathy, and the courage to set boundaries. Sophie's shadow no longer dictated my reactions. I met adversity with intention rather than fear. Then came the unexpected: a letter from a local nursing association inviting me to speak at a conference about pediatric care for children in foster care and kinship guardianship. Standing on the stage, looking out at an audience of professionals, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. As I shared my story, not the details of the courtroom battle, but the lessons about trust, empathy, and healing, I realized the full circle of my journey. I had turned personal trauma into a tool for education, advocacy, and inspiration. Returning home that evening, I found David waiting with a quiet smile. "You were incredible today, David." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. I leaned into him, realizing that the life I was building wasn't just about success or stability. It was about love, purpose, and alignment with my values. For the first time, I felt in control, not just of my environment, but of my narrative. I began setting long-term goals, completing advanced pediatric certifications, expanding volunteer programs, and creating support networks for young adults transitioning out of foster care. Each plan, each step was a deliberate act of reclaiming agency over my future. I knew setbacks were inevitable, but they no longer intimidated me. I had learned to navigate adversity with clarity, grounded in a deep understanding of my own worth. The past still lingered in quiet moments: Sophie's message, a memory of injustice, a fleeting pang of old guilt, but it no longer had power over me. I was no longer a girl living under someone else's rules or misused funds. I was a woman actively crafting a life built on integrity, compassion, and choice. As night fell over the city, I stood on the balcony with David, gazing at the skyline. The stars were scattered across the sky, distant yet present, like fragments of hope. I breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of years of struggle lift slightly with each breath. This life, my life, was finally mine to shape, to nurture, and to cherish. Autumn arrived in a cascade of amber and gold, painting the city streets with colors that seemed to signal both change and reflection. Though my life was steadily unfolding on my own terms, the past was never far behind. Certain memories, Sophie's manipulations, the injustice and the cold indifference of those who should have cared, still lingered like shadows, waiting for quiet moments to resurface. One morning, as I walked to the hospital for my shift, I noticed a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. It was Uncle Jack, looking older and more worn than I remembered. His eyes held a mixture of guilt and hope, the kind that can only exist in someone seeking redemption. "Alfia," he said softly, "I need to speak with you, if you're willing." I hesitated, aware of the fragile line between closure and old wounds reopening. We sat in a small cafe nearby, the aroma of coffee filling the space, masking some of the tension between us. Uncle Jack's voice trembled slightly as he recounted years of silent complicity, his admission carrying the weight of truth. "I should have intervened sooner. I should have protected you. I let fear and loyalty to Sophie blind me to what you needed." His words stirred a strange mix of anger and empathy within me. I listened quietly, understanding that forgiveness wouldn't come automatically. It had to be chosen, cultivated carefully, and weighed against the reality of the past. "I appreciate your honesty," I finally said, my voice measured. "But the choices you didn't make had real consequences. I survived, but I can't erase the years you stood by." He nodded, swallowing hard. The gravity of his silence punctuated his remorse. That encounter triggered a series of reflections on accountability, both others and my own. I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the shadows of my childhood. It was about learning to walk through them without being consumed. Each memory, each confrontation became a stepping stone rather than an obstacle. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. Back at the hospital, my responsibilities continued to expand. I began overseeing small initiatives aimed at integrating emotional support with medical care for children in kinship guardianship. These programs, often overlooked, became personal missions. I met with parents, guardians, and social workers, advocating for resources and providing guidance that I had once desperately needed. Every success, no matter how small, felt like reclaiming a fragment of the life I had once been denied. One evening, while reviewing reports in my apartment, my phone buzzed with an unexpected email. It was from a former colleague at another hospital inviting me to contribute to a nationwide pediatric care study. The project aimed to improve outcomes for children in non-traditional guardianship settings, precisely the population I had grown up in. Excitement and apprehension mingled within me. It was recognition of my expertise, but also a reminder of the scars that had brought me here. David noticed my conflicted expression. "You've earned this," he said, his hand finding mine. "You're making a difference, Alfia. Not despite your past, but because of it." His words echoed what I had begun to realize. The past was not a chain, but a source of insight. I accepted the opportunity, understanding that my voice could influence systems in ways I never could have imagined as a child. Amid these professional milestones, I also allowed myself moments of personal reflection. Visiting my mother's grave, tending to her memory with fresh flowers and whispered updates about my life became a ritual of grounding. I spoke aloud to her, sharing small victories and ongoing struggles. In those moments, I felt an unbroken connection, a silent reassurance that her love had endured in ways Sophie could never replicate. Unexpectedly, Sophie's shadow made a brief return. A social media post hinted at some ongoing minor dispute, though no direct contact reached me. Instead of anger, I felt a quiet detachment. Years of therapy, experience, and building a life grounded in supportive relationships had fortified me. I was no longer the vulnerable girl she once manipulated. I could witness her actions without fear or obligation, recognizing the limitations of those who refuse to change. By the end of the chapter, I understood that confronting the shadows of the past wasn't about vindication or revenge. It was acknowledgement, learning, and moving forward with intentionality. Each challenge I faced, professional opportunities, personal relationships, and remnants of family conflict, became part of a tapestry that reflected resilience, purpose, and the power to define my own narrative. As the autumn leaves fell softly outside my window, I felt a quiet determination. I would continue building, nurturing, and advocating, turning the lessons of pain into tools of empowerment for myself and for those who would come after me. Winter settled over the city, a crisp clarity in the air that seemed to mirror the state of my life. After years of struggle, injustice, and growth, I finally felt ready to embrace the next chapter without fear of shadows lurking behind every corner. The courtroom battles, the betrayals, the lost years, all of it had led to a place of hard-earned clarity and purpose. The morning began with the usual bustle of the hospital. Children's Memorial was alive with the rhythm of small victories, laughter echoing through hallways, punctuated by the occasional whimper or anxious cry. Each moment reminded me why I had pursued nursing, to offer compassion where it was most needed, to be a steady hand when life felt unpredictable. My work was no longer just a career, it was a calling shaped by my own experiences. That afternoon, a meeting with the scholarship committee I had joined in my mother's name brought unexpected joy. Reviewing applications from young aspiring nurses from single-parent households, I felt a profound sense of connection. Each essay spoke of challenges and resilience, of dreams nurtured despite circumstances that could have broken them. I recognized myself in those words, a girl who had fought to survive and now had the opportunity to guide others toward thriving. David's support was unwavering. His quiet encouragement and steady presence a constant reminder that love could be found, nurtured, and protected. We began planning our wedding in earnest, choosing a simple ceremony that celebrated family, not the kind defined by blood or obligation, but by choice and mutual respect. The Parkers and Hoffmans would stand by us, symbols of the family I had chosen and earned through connection and loyalty. One crisp evening, I found myself back at my mother's grave, the snow forming a delicate lace over the earth. I knelt, placing fresh flowers and speaking aloud, recounting the milestones and small triumphs. I've survived, Mom. I've built a life that honors you. I've turned pain into purpose. Tears slid freely down my cheeks, but they were tears of release, not despair. The weight of lost years and misused funds no longer pressed upon me. It had transformed into fuel for the life I was creating. Unexpectedly, a letter arrived from Uncle Jack. There were no apologies this time, only acknowledgement of past failings and hope that I had found peace. It was a quiet, distant gesture of reconciliation, no longer a burden, but a bridge toward understanding. I filed the letter away, a reminder that closure could exist without full resolution. Professionally, my career flourished. I was promoted to charge nurse in the pediatric unit, my leadership recognized by both peers and supervisors. Beyond the hospital, my involvement in advocacy programs for children in foster care expanded. I became a mentor, a voice of encouragement, and a living example that trauma and hardship could be transformed into resilience, empathy, and purpose. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced that I had the power to shape my life independently of those who had sought to diminish it. The scholarship fund in my mother's name blossomed, providing opportunities for 3 deserving students within its first year. Meeting each recipient, hearing their aspirations, and witnessing their determination reminded me of my own journey. In a quiet moment, I realized that in giving, I was receiving validation, purpose, and the enduring legacy of my mother's love. David and I married on a bright spring day, surrounded by our chosen family. There were no grand displays, no unnecessary pomp, just love, support, and the quiet knowledge that we had forged a family defined by respect, loyalty, and care. The ceremony symbolized not just our union, but the triumph of building life from fragments of loss and hardship. Looking back at the terrified 13-year-old girl who had clutched her mother's letter in trembling hands, I marveled at the journey. Every step, from survival to thriving, had been shaped by resilience, determination, and the unwavering support of those who truly mattered. Sophie's shadow, once looming large, had faded into insignificance. Her inability to provide love or care had not defined me. Instead, it had propelled me toward creating a life of compassion, empowerment, and authentic connection. In the quiet moments, I often reflected on the lessons learned, that family is not dictated by blood or obligation, that self-worth is inherent and not measured by others' treatment, and that the most profound victories are often internal. I had reclaimed my narrative, defined my purpose, and embraced the freedom to build a life rooted in love, service, and integrity. The story that began with loss and injustice ended not with bitterness, but with triumph. I had survived, healed, and grown, not just for myself, but for those who would follow in my footsteps, those who needed guidance, support, and a reminder that the past does not determine the future. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the city, I whispered to the memory of my mother once more. We made it, Mom. I've built the life we dreamed of. Thank you for your love. It carried me farther than anyone else ever could. With that, I stepped forward into the life I had chosen, unburdened, empowered, and ready for all the chapters yet to be written.